Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me also offer a good morning to our witnesses. Let me also join you, Mr. Chairman, and begin by thanking literally the tens of thousands of men and women across America's intelligence community who work every day to keep our country safe. Their work is by necessity secret. That is the nature of intelligence. But that is also why hearings like this one matter so much. Over the past year, we have seen a series of developments that raise serious concerns about the erosion of safeguards that protect both our democracy and our security. And nowhere is that more worrying than when it comes to the integrity of our elections. For decades now, our intelligence community has warned that foreign adversaries, including Russia, China, and Iran, are actively seeking to shape the outcome of American elections. These efforts have included cyber intrusions, disinformation campaigns, and covert influence operations designed to divide Americans and undermine our confidence in our democratic institutions. Protecting our elections from these threats should be one of the intelligence community's highest priorities. The DNI is supposed to be coordinating intelligence on foreign election interference, warning the American people about adversaries seeking to undermine our democracy, ensuring that federal, state, and local officials have the information they need. Congress even required the creation of a foreign malign influence center inside the office of the DNI to coordinate the intelligence community's response to foreign election interference and ensure that these threats are properly shared across the government. That is the mission Congress assigned to the DNI. But while foreign adversaries are actively probing our democratic institutions, the DNI has eliminated the Foreign Malign Influence Center and does not have a designated official coordinating the response to election threats. And for months, the committee has repeatedly requested briefings from the IC, briefings that are required by law on legitimate foreign threats to the midterms. We have received no response. Now, that silence, I believe, should concern every member of the committee because it clearly demonstrates the DNI is not interested in protecting American democracy by combating foreign influence. Instead, unfortunately, we have seen the DNI involve herself in purely domestic matters. Last month, we saw Director Gabbard personally participate in a law enforcement raid to seize election ballots and voting machine records in Fulton County, Georgia. A raid tied to an election that the president lost 6 years ago. When the warrant supporting the raid was unsealed, it showed something deeply troubling. There was no foreign connection to justify the involvement of our nation's top spy. Instead, the predicate for the warrant was a slop of debunked conspiracy theories that had already been rejected repeatedly by courts, by independent investigators, and even by Georgia's own Republican Secretary of State. Yet the nation's top intelligence official was personally involved in this operation. This raises one very serious question. If the intelligence community is not being deployed to mobilize against foreign threats, why is it being deployed at all on a domestic issue? The DNI's appearance at this raid, as well as their involvement in seizing voting machines from Puerto Rico, suggests something that should also alarm every American. I believe an organized effort to misuse her national security powers to interfere in domestic politics and potentially provide a pretext for the president's unconstitutional efforts to seize control of the upcoming elections. Now, don't take my word for it. The president has repeatedly pushed for the nationalization of our elections, calling for federal government to override the state election laws and, quote, take over voting while continuing to make false statements about election fraud. And we have heard troubling rhetoric from senior officials that reinforce these concerns. As former Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said publicly, we've been, and this is a quote, we've been proactive trying to make sure we have the right people voting, electing the right leaders to lead this country. At the same time, the administration has brought into government individuals promoting conspiracy theories about our elections. The so-called White House Director of Election Security and Integrity, Kurt Olson, played a key role in efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Now Mr. Olson holds a position inside the federal government with the authority to refer criminal investigations and access our most sensitive security information, all supposedly doing his witch hunts around elections. As a matter of fact, according to the court filings, he helped trigger the FBI seizure of the ballots in Fulton County. So it's worth asking, why is someone whose career has been devoted to undermining the legitimate results of a democratic election now operating from inside the federal government with access to law enforcement and intelligence authorities? What exactly has he been empowered to do? As members of our committee know, this committee was created in the aftermath of the unconstitutional abuses exposed after Watergate. The guardrails have been built around our intelligence and law enforcement agencies over the past several decades exist for a reason. Without them, America begins to look more like adversaries emphasized in this year's annual threat assessment: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and less like a democracy. Confronting these very clear and present threats to American security requires experienced professionals in intelligence agencies that are focused squarely on their mission. Instead, over the past year, we've seen actions that only serve to weaken them. Politically motivated purges at the FBI has resulted in the exodus of hundreds of agents and the reassignments of hundreds more from key national security areas like counterintelligence, counterterrorism, and cyber, and where they've been redeployed to? Immigration enforcement. In one troubling case, agents working on a task force focused on threats from Iran, clearly something that's pretty damn important right now, were dismissed because they had previously participated in the investigation of the president's mishandling of classified information. Elsewhere, the Bureau's budget is being slashed. Last year, it cut over $500 million, with the largest decreases from cyber, counterterrorism, and counterespionage. And the remaining scarce resources are being squandered on things like a $60 million jet for the director's personal travel so he can go golfing in Scotland or partying with athletes in Milan. In fact, according to a whistleblower account, those flights became so frequent they even delayed the Bureau's response to major incidents like the Charlie Kirk assassination or the shooting at Brown University. Credible reports also indicate that highly trained FBI agents from elite SWAT units have been reassigned to chauffeur his girlfriend, an unprecedented use of personnel whose training are actually intended for hunting violent criminals and neutralizing terrorists. Unfortunately, this dysfunction has not been limited to the FBI. Both the National Security Agency and the Defense Intelligence Agency, and this is no reflection on the two gentlemen sitting in front of us, were both left leaderless for months after the president fired their directors, one at the behest of a 9/11 conspiracy theorist, and the other for providing a fact-based assessment that contradicted the president's claims about obliterating Iran's nuclear program. Clearly, if the program had been truly obliterated, the president wouldn't be bombing again right now. And again, more than 1/3 of the personnel at CISA, created by Congress to protect critical infrastructure like power, water, and election systems, have been forced out. That seems like a real mistake as we still grapple with the intrusion called Typhoon and the recent Iranian cyber attack on Stryker. And we are now seeing in real time the cost to the State Department. Thousands of American citizens were trapped in a literal war zone with little assistance from their own government. For a time, those calling the State Department hotline for assistance were greeted with a pre-recorded message that said, quote, "Please do not rely on the U.S. government for assisted departure or evacuation." This was a foreseeable security crisis. When you start a war of choice, when there was no imminent threat, you should be able to prepare to make sure you get Americans out of the war zone. That same attitude, pushing some of our closest friends into the arms of our most capable foes, has profound consequences. Two of our most significant allies, Canada and the UK, are currently working to sign trade deals with China because they no longer believe the United States is a dependable partner. That's a remarkable statement in 2026. And in the president's war of choice with Iran, a war that has already killed 13 service members, cost American taxpayers billions of dollars, and scrambled supply chains from oil to fertilizer to aluminum, nobody answered the call when the president asked our allies to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz. As the president's own counterterrorism chief acknowledged in his resignation yesterday, Iran posed no imminent threat to the United States. And unfortunately, our allies have been alienated and distracted by the administration's unilateral threats like invading Greenland, and the result is clear. Americans have been left more exposed in an already dangerous conflict. Now, what I just outlined is quite a list, and it's a partial one at that. Matter of fact, we've got a full list we'd like to share with all the press. So what does this all mean? It matters because I believe the warnings contained in this year's annual threat assessment. I believe our IC when they say the global security environment is becoming more complex and that armed conflict is becoming more global. And I also agree with the assessment when it says that to succeed, we must think prudently and prioritize our efforts. On the topic of the annual threat assessment, I want to close where I began by noting that since the first time since 2017, in the aftermath of Russia's intervention in our 2016 elections, the annual threat assessment includes nothing about adversary attempts to influence American elections. Now, I don't believe this omission means that the threat has disappeared. It means that the intelligence community is no longer being allowed to speak honestly about it. And it raises serious questions, and I will be asking about your priorities, Director Gabbard, in terms of what you're choosing to prioritize instead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Director Gabbard, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Cotton, Vice Chair Warner, members of the committee, good morning. I'm here today to present the 2026 Annual Threat Assessment, joined by the directors of the CIA, FBI, DIA, and NSA. Before I continue, on behalf of the intelligence community, I want to extend our thanks to General Hartman for his 37 years of service in uniform and closing out his 37 years with tremendous leadership of the NSA. This briefing is being provided in accordance with ODNI statutory responsibility. I'd like to remind those who are watching what I am briefing here today conveys the intelligence community's assessment of the threats facing U.S. citizens, our homeland, and our interests, not my personal views or opinions. In this assessment, we're following the structure of priorities that were laid out in the President's national security strategy, starting with threats to our homeland and then shifting to global risks. The defense of our homeland is of the utmost importance to the American people, and efforts by this administration have shown over the last year the results of bolstering homeland defense in the security of the American people. For example, the strict enforcement of U.S. policies at the U.S.-Mexico border and regionally have served as a deterrent, drastically reducing illegal immigration. Based on Customs and Border Patrol data, January 2026's monthly encounters are down 83.8% compared to January 2025. Encounters declined 79% compared to 2024. The drivers of migration are likely to continue. Potential worsening instability in countries like Cuba and Haiti risk triggering migration surges, and smugglers who have long operated as transnational criminal organizations continue to view chaos as an opportunity for profit and will continue to look to profit from illegal immigration flows. These transnational criminal organizations continue to pose a daily and direct threat to the health and safety of millions of U.S. citizens, primarily and directly by producing and trafficking in illegal drugs. Under President Trump's leadership, fentanyl overdose deaths have seen a 30% decrease from September 2024 to September 2025. President Trump's aggressive efforts to more directly and actively target these transnational criminal organizations and reduce the inflow of fentanyl precursors has already had a significant impact, which is likely to continue. We've seen fentanyl potency also decrease, likely due to disruptions to the production supply chain. U.S. efforts to work with China and India to halt the flow of fentanyl precursor chemicals to North America are demonstrating some improvement, but there is more work to be done, as sadly, there are still tens of thousands of fentanyl-related deaths in America every year. Mexico-based TCOs like the Sinaloa Cartel and Jalisco New Generation Cartel dominate the production and smuggling of fentanyl, heroin, meth, and cocaine into the United States. Colombia-based DCOs and illegal armed groups like the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia and the National Liberation Army are responsible for producing and trafficking large volumes of cocaine to the U.S. and European markets, with now some indicators of attempts to expand their market to the Asia-Pacific region. Colombia remains the world's largest producer of cocaine, and Colombian criminal groups have expanded their trafficking relationships with neighboring Ecuadorian and Brazilian gangs. As you know, MS-13 is well established in cells within the United States and uses violence to intimidate the Salvadoran diaspora, engaging in murder, extortion, retail drug trafficking, firearms offenses, and prostitution, fueling increased violence and instability. These and other TCOs continue to present a very tangible and individualized risk of violent crime to everyday Americans and contribute to regional instability. As the President increases his focus on counter-drug and counter-cartel pressures, they're likely to seek ways to try to adapt their operations, including shifting production locations and trafficking routes and methods. The United States continues to face a complex and evolving threat landscape with a geographically diverse set of Islamist terrorist actors seeking to propagate their ideology globally and harm Americans, even as al-Qaeda and ISIS remain weaker today than they were at their respective peaks. The spread of Islamist ideology, in some cases led by individuals and organizations associated with the Muslim Brotherhood, poses a fundamental threat to freedom and the foundational principles that underpin Western civilization. Islamist groups and individuals use this ideology for recruiting and financial support for terrorist groups and individuals around the world, and to advance their political objectives of establishing an Islamist caliphate which governs based on Sharia. There are increasing examples of this in various European countries, and President Trump's designation of certain Muslim Brotherhood chapters as foreign terrorist organizations is a mechanism to secure Americans against this threat. In response to setbacks to their capabilities of conducting large-scale complex attacks, Islamist terrorist groups have shifted toward focusing on executing information operations to spread propaganda and inspire or enable individuals located in or with access to the West. U.S. counterterrorism efforts, primarily in Iraq, Somalia, Yemen, and Syria in 2025, were instrumental in removing key terrorist leaders and operatives, degrading the ability of al-Qaeda and ISIS to quickly reconstitute its leadership and plan large-scale attacks against the homeland and U.S. interests abroad. Strict U.S. border enforcement measures and increased deportations of individuals with suspected links to Islamist terrorists have reduced access to the homeland and removed some potential sources of future terrorist attacks. Since January, U.S. officials have only had a handful of encounters at our borders with individuals associated with terrorist groups. This is a positive trend. However, our interagency coordinated efforts to continue to identify, locate, and remove known or suspected terrorists who may already be in the United States continues with vigilance. In 2025, there were at least 3 Islamist terrorist attacks in the United States. Law enforcement disrupted at least 15 U.S.-based Islamist terrorist plotters. Roughly half of last year's disrupted plotters had some online contact with Islamist terrorists inspired by Islamist foreign terrorist organizations abroad. For example, in the recent attempt to attack a synagogue in Michigan, the shooter had familial ties to a Hezbollah leader. Al-Qaeda and ISIS pose the biggest threat to U.S. interests overseas in parts of Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia, where these groups operate. In the Middle East, AQAP in Yemen, ISIS-K in South Asia, and ISIS in Syria are among the most likely groups conducting external plotting. ISIS in Syria is likely seeking to rebuild its ranks, expand support networks, and solicit funds by re-engaging with and recruiting from the likely hundreds of ISIS detainees and thousands of ISIS-linked women and children who were either released or escaped from prisons and displaced person camps that were previously run by the Syrian Democratic Forces in northeast Syria. Meanwhile, state actors present a risk broader in scope by seeking new capabilities in kinetic and cyber warfare. The United States' secure nuclear deterrent continues to ensure safety in the homeland against strategic threats. However, the intelligence community assesses that Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and Pakistan have been researching and developing an array of novel, advanced, or traditional missile delivery systems with nuclear and conventional payloads that put our homeland within range. The IC assesses that threats to the homeland will expand collectively to more than 16,000 missiles by 2035, from the current assessed figure of more than 3,000 missiles. The IC assesses that China and Russia are developing advanced delivery systems meant to be capable of penetrating or bypassing U.S. missile defenses. North Korea's ICBMs can already reach U.S. soil, and the IC assesses that it is committed to expanding its nuclear arsenal. Pakistan's long-range ballistic missile development potentially could include ICBMs with the range capable of striking the homeland. The IC assesses that Iran has previously demonstrated space launch and other technology it could use to begin to develop a militarily viable ICBM before 2035, should Tehran attempt to pursue that capability. However, these assessments will clearly be updated as the full impact of Operation Epic Fury's devastating strikes on Iran's missile production facilities, stockpiles, and launch capabilities is determined. These nations collectively will likely seek to understand U.S. plans for advanced missile defense for the homeland, probably for the purpose of shaping their own missile development programs and assessing U.S. intentions regarding deterrence. Shifting to the cyber domain, the IC assesses that China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and non-state ransomware groups will continue to seek to compromise U.S. government and private sector networks, as well as critical infrastructure, to collect intelligence, create options for future disruption, and for financial gain. The IC assesses that China and Russia present the most persistent and active threats and are continuing their R&D efforts. North Korea's cyber program is sophisticated and agile. In 2025 alone, North Korea's cryptocurrency heist probably stole $2 billion, which the IC assesses is helping to fund the regime and include further development of its strategic weapons programs. Financially or ideologically motivated non-state actors are becoming more bold, with ransomware groups shifting to faster, high-volume attacks that are harder to identify and mitigate. Innovation in the field of artificial intelligence will likely accelerate these threats in the cyber domain. The IC assesses that it will increasingly shape cyber operations, with both cyber operators and defenders using these tools to improve their speed and effectiveness. For example, in August of 2025, cyber actors used an AI tool to conduct a data extortion operation against international government, healthcare, and public health emergency service sectors, as well as religious institutions. Moving to the Arctic, the IC assesses that Russia, and to a lesser extent China, aim to strengthen their presence in the region through increased maritime trade, natural resource extraction, and military activity. Russia, which has the longest coastline in the Arctic, has long sought recognition of its polar great power status and is deploying more military forces and building new permanent infrastructure. China, though not an Arctic country, is engaged in more limited efforts in the region to advance its own strategic and economic interests. The IC assesses that China is the most capable competitor in the field of artificial intelligence. The IC assesses that AI capabilities are rapidly advancing and changing the threat landscape, as this is a defining technology that enables computers and machines to simulate human learning comprehension, problem solving, creativity, and autonomy. It will be critical to ensure that humans remain in control of how AI is used and of the machines that may threaten to autonomously violate the interests of the American people across all domains. AI adoption at scale across the spectrum of usage poses serious risks. AI has the potential to aid in weapons and systems design and has been used in recent conflicts to influence targeting and streamline decision-making, underscoring the risk and likely threats that could manifest on the battlefield. Early developers in quantum computers will give countries an extraordinary technological advantage over others to quickly process national security information and break current encryption methodology used to protect sensitive finance, healthcare, and government information. The global security landscape is volatile and complex, with armed conflict growing more common and posing potential threats against U.S. interests. Strategic competition and regional and smaller powers are becoming more willing to use force to pursue their interests, heightening the risk of conflict. The IC assesses the space domain is becoming increasingly contested, with China and Russia developing counter-space capabilities to challenge U.S. space efforts. The threat of nuclear proliferation and advancing chemical and biological warfare capabilities continues to grow. I'll turn now to our neighborhood in the Western Hemisphere, where flagging economies, high crime rates, pervasive organized crime, migration flows, corruption, narcotics trafficking, all of these present a spectrum of risks to U.S. interests, and where strategic competitors seek to gain greater influence in the region. The IC assesses that Latin America and the Caribbean almost certainly will see hotspots of volatility in the coming year. Since Maduro's arrest, the IC assesses a shift in Venezuela's leadership towards cooperating with the U.S. to open its economy, to develop the country's oil and gas extraction capability, and we've seen their movement in releasing political prisoners. The U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement review in 2026 will likely increase uncertainty in many Latin American countries, especially those that rely on Mexico as an export destination for intermediate goods for manufacture and onward export to the U.S. China, Russia, and Iran are likely seeking to sustain economic, political, and military engagement with Latin America. The IC assesses that China's demand for raw materials is likely to continue to drive its economic outreach, while Russia likely wants to expand its current security and diplomatic ties with Cuba and Nicaragua. The IC assesses that China aims to elevate its own political, economic, military, and technological power to increase its own regional positioning and global influence to fend off threats to their interests. While there are challenging areas where interests diverge, President Trump's diplomatic engagements with President Xi to work towards U.S. interests have enabled progress where those interests align. The IC assesses that China continues to rapidly modernize its military forces across all domains in pursuit of its goal to achieve world-class status by mid-century. This includes building a force with the aim of being capable of deterring U.S. and allied forces in the region, and to achieve their stated objective of developing the ability to seize Taiwan by force if necessary. However, the IC assesses that China likely prefers to set the conditions for an eventual peaceful reunification with Taiwan short of conflict. The IC assesses that an increasingly confident North Korean regime remains a source of concern regionally and globally. Its weapons of mass destruction, its conventional military capabilities, illicit cyber activities, and demonstrated willingness to use asymmetric capabilities poses a threat to U.S. and its allies, particularly South Korea and Japan. North Korea's partnership with Russia is growing, and in 2025, Kim took steps to improve ties with China, still North Korea's most important trading partner and economic benefactor. The IC assesses that North Korea's support for Russia in the war against Ukraine has increased North Korea's capabilities as their forces have gained combat experience in 21st century warfare, along with equipment. In 2024, North Korea deployed more than 11,000 troops to Russia to support combat operations in Kursk. Pyongyang continues to develop and expand its strategic weapons programs, including missiles that can evade U.S. and regional missile defenses. It is continuing to work to increase its nuclear warhead stockpile and maintains biological and chemical weapons capabilities. Russia retains the capability to selectively challenge U.S. interests globally by military and non-military means. The IC assesses that the most dangerous threat posed by Russia to the U.S. is the potential of an escalatory spiral in an ongoing conflict such as Ukraine, or a new conflict that led to direct hostilities, including the potential deployment of nuclear weapons. The IC assesses that Putin continues to invest in Russia's defense industrial base, as well as novel capabilities that may pose a greater threat to the U.S. homeland and forces abroad than conventional weapons. Russia has advanced systems, hypersonic missiles, and undersea capabilities designed to negate the U.S. military advantage. Moscow also relies on other tools to exert pressure, using gray zone tactics to further its goals and compete below the level of armed conflict. Russia is also building an extensive counterspace capabilities to contest U.S. space dominance. Its development of a nuclear counterspace weapon poses the greatest single threat to the world's space architecture. During the past year, the IC assesses that Russia has maintained the upper hand in the war against Ukraine. U.S.-led negotiations between Moscow and Kiev are ongoing. Until such an agreement is met, Moscow is likely to continue fighting a slow war of attrition until they view their objectives have been achieved. In the Middle East, conflict and instability will shape security, political, and economic dynamics in a variety of ways. The IC assesses that Operation Epic Fury is advancing fundamental change in the region that began with Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7, 2023, and continued with the 12-day war last year, resulting in weakening Iran and its proxies. The IC assesses the regime in Iran appears to be intact but largely degraded due to attacks on its leadership and military capabilities. Its conventional military power projection capabilities have largely been destroyed, leaving limited options. Iran's strategic position has been significantly degraded. The U.S.-led maximum pressure campaign and snapback of European sanctions added additional pressure to an already bleak Iranian economy, resulting in mass protests earlier this year that Tehran suppressed by killing thousands of protesters. Even if the regime remains intact, the IC assesses that internal tensions are likely to increase as Iran's economy worsens. Even so, Iran and its proxies continue to attack U.S. and allied interests in the Middle East. The IC assesses that if a hostile regime survives, it will likely seek to begin a years-long effort to rebuild its military, missiles, and UAV forces. Prior to Operation Epic Fury, the IC assesses Iran was trying to recover from the severe damage to its nuclear infrastructure sustained during the 12-day war, and continued to refuse to comply with its nuclear obligations with the IAEA, refusing them access to key facilities. The IC assesses that China, Russia, and North Korea see the United States as a strategic competitor and potential adversary. Iran has long viewed the U.S. as an adversary and is engaged in active conflict with the U.S. as of today. These four countries, the IC assesses, are likely to continue their selective cooperation with each other, which could bolster their individual capabilities and threats to U.S. interests more broadly. However, currently these relationships are primarily bilateral on selective issues and depend on broader circumstances, divergent sovereign interests, and in some cases, concerns over directly confronting the United States. These factors, the IC assesses, are likely to constrain their relationships. Finally, conflicts on the continent of Africa are likely to persist through 2026 due to poor governance, economic demands, and external support. Tensions continue between Ethiopia and Eritrea, which could rapidly accelerate to conflict. Contentious national elections in Somalia could distract the federal government away from counterterrorism actions against al-Shabaab, which continues to conduct terror attacks while providing funding and propaganda support to other elements of al-Qaeda in Yemen. The civil war in Sudan continues even as external negotiations occur. ISIS in West Africa and the Sahel have increased the intensity of their attacks against local security forces, expanding their areas of operation and moving closer to cities with a U.S. presence. The IC assesses that African governments will likely use their wealth in critical minerals to seek partnerships that deliver them meaningful benefit. Concurrent conflicts and crises across the continent will continue to put U.S. citizens at risk and cause further instability. In closing, as leaders of the intelligence community, we remain committed to providing the President and policymakers with timely, unbiased, relevant intelligence to inform decision-making and to ensure the safety, security, and freedom of the American people. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Gabbard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Gabbard, the whole country knows that you were recently involved in an FBI operation to seize ballots in Fulton County, Georgia. Yet this was despite the fact that the warrant showed no foreign interference or nexus. Matter of fact, the warrant was based entirely on conspiracy theories that have already been examined and rejected repeatedly. Now, where is the authority for you to involve yourself in a domestic law enforcement activity?
Thank you, Vice Chairman. I appreciate the question. As you know, I've addressed every issue you've raised in detail in a letter, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to do it in this forum. As you stated, Congress provided by statute, ODNI, with the responsibility of election security and counterintelligence in 2021. As you also know, ODNI has purview and oversight.
I know the history very well, but could you just address
I am addressing the question. ODNI also has purview and overview over two domestic-related agencies, the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI, both of which have purview over election security responsibilities to ensure the integrity of our elections. I want to correct one of your statements that you've made multiple times, which is false. I did not participate in a law enforcement activity, nor would I, because that does not exist within my authorities.
You were present on the scene. Are the photos of you on the scene false?
I was at Fulton County, sir, at the request of the President, and to work with the FBI to observe this action that had long been awaited. I was not aware of what was in the warrant or was not in the warrant.
And what was the President's specific request for you to go to? What was the specific request that was made by the President for you to show up in Fulton County?
To go and observe the FBI's activities on this issue.
So why?
When you look at the your question, sir.
Do you have the answer why the President was knowing about this affidavit before it was even served?
I'm not aware that the President knew about an affidavit before it was served.
Then why was he sending you to Fulton County?
This occurred the day that the FBI had it approved, their warrant approved by a local judge, and they began to execute this. To address your question, sir, about the foreign nexus question, in order for us to better understand the vulnerabilities in our election systems that may exist today as we look to 2026, and yes, we are very focused on trying to make sure that this election is one that the American people have
Director
faith,
Gabbard, I've got a number of questions. Director Gabbard, I have a number of questions. Let me ask my next question, please. You have not provided any of the required reports or briefings to this committee on foreign interference. This is the first threat assessment since 2017 that didn't even mention foreign interference. Last year, when you were already confirmed, it mentioned it at high level. Are you saying there is no foreign threat to our elections in the midterms this year?
As I stated in the outset of my remarks, this year's annual threat assessment matches the prioritization of threats and
Please answer the question, yes or no. Is there foreign threat interference to our elections this year? Are there foreign...
Please allow me to answer the question, sir. The intelligence community has been and continues to remain focused on any collection and intelligence products that show a potential foreign threat for those who are seeking to...
So far, there has been none then because you've made no reports.
System.
Excuse me, ma'am. If you want to ask the questions, you should have stayed in Congress. Please answer the questions.
I didn't ask you a question, sir. I'm trying to answer your questions.
So you're saying the failure to provide any reports or the failure to have any mention of a foreign threat assessment, I would draw the conclusion there must be no foreign threat to our elections in 26. So that brings me a question that I have for both you, ma'am, and Director Patel. There are reports that in 2020, the president was preparing an executive order to potentially seize ballots or bring in federal forces. There is a published report that there is a similar EO being drafted right now about 2026, citing China. Director Patel, do you have any knowledge of that draft EO?
Thank you, Vice Chairman. I do not, sir.
Director Gabbard, do you have any?
I do not.
Thank you. Let me move to Iran. Now, I understand, and I appreciated, Director Gabbard, your comments yesterday about agreeing that the president has sole authority, I guess, in his bones to declare whether something is an imminent threat. I didn't agree with your friend, Mr. Kent, but I didn't, again, I agreed with him yesterday on the fact that there was no imminent threat. I guess what I'm concerned about, one thing is, even in your printed testimony today on page 6, and your last paragraph on page 6, as a result of Operation Midnight Hammer, Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated. There's been no efforts to try to rebuild their enrichment capability. You omitted that paragraph from your oral opening. Was that because the president had said there was an imminent threat 2 weeks?
No, sir. I recognize that the time was running long, and I skipped through some of the portions.
So you chose to take
my oral delivered remarks.
You chose
sir.
to omit the parts that contradict the president. The president continues to say as well that he had no idea, was shocked that the Iranians had moved to take over the Strait of Hormuz. Did you provide any intelligence that would say that it would be that it was not likely that the Iranians would try to move on the strait?
I'm not aware of those remarks, and I think those of us here at the table can point to the fact that historically the Iranians have always threatened to leverage their control over the Strait of Hormuz.
Why would the president say he was amazed?
I'm not aware of those remarks.
What about the comments the president made that thought that he was surprised again, reports that Iran struck the adjacent Gulf states?
Again, I'm not aware of those remarks. We have been
let me
and
ask you this.
continue to provide
Did you brief the president? Did you brief the president? Did you brief the president if he starts a war of choice that the likely result would be that Iran would strike adjacent Gulf nations and close the Strait of Hormuz? Did you brief him on those two facts that I think have been consistently the assumptions of the intelligence community?
I have not and won't divulge internal conversations. I will say that those of us within the intelligence community continue to provide the president with all of the best objective intelligence available to inform his decisions.
Senator Collins.
Thank you all for your service to our country and the people you represent. We are in debt to all of you. I want to ask you, Director Ratcliffe, yesterday, the head of the National Counterterrorism Center resigned, saying that Iran did not represent an imminent threat to the United States. Is there anything to indicate that Iran had ceased in its nuclear ambitions or in its desire to continue to build ballistic missiles capable of threatening American troops and allies in the Middle East?
Senator, no. In fact, the intelligence reflects the contrary.
So you disagree with Mr. Kent?
I do.
I would think any fair-minded assessment of the situation, even based on open sources, would reflect the danger the regime poses to the United States. Isn't it true they've basically been at war with the West since 1979 during the Iranian Revolution and have American blood on their hands?
That's absolutely correct. I think Iran has been a constant threat to the United States for an extended period of time and posed an immediate threat at this time.
The threat assessment says that al-Qaeda and ISIS maintain the intent to launch operations targeting the U.S., but it's most likely to occur through U.S.-based lone offenders. I want to ask you, Director Patel, it seems like there's been a raft of incidents recently. On March the 1st in Austin, Texas, where I live, a lone gunman wearing a sweatshirt saying "Property of Allah," and who the T-shirt he wore underneath had an Iranian flag, killed 3 innocent people and injured 12 more. And then we know in Virginia, the Old Dominion shooting, somebody who unbelievably was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison for attempting to support ISIS, but then was released only to commit another terrorist attack. We all are familiar with what's happened in Michigan, in New York, and I applaud the important role that the FBI has played in stopping some terrorist attacks, but obviously the FBI can't be everywhere all the time. Would you please talk about your cooperation and collaboration with Homeland Security investigations in countering terrorist attacks against the United States?
Thank you, Senator. Absolutely. It is essential that the FBI cooperates with the entire interagency. But as to your question about DHS specifically, what we have stood up around the country are 59 Homeland Security task forces in 59 separate locations.
These are joint terrorism task forces?
Essentially, the JTTF model was expanded. So the FBI owns 56 joint terrorism task forces in each of our field offices. On top of that, we have 59 HSTFs, which are co-led by the FBI and DHS. And what that allows us to do is things like we did down in New Orleans just over the holiday period, where we surged for a 6-week period of time, and where we dropped the murder rate by double-digit points, and also was the first time that Mardi Gras in its entire history had not one homicide. So when you bring the powers of the Homeland Security folks, DHS, and the FBI together, this is the purpose of it, to get after not just the terrorism threat, but the violence and the criminal activity in our cities. And that's why we're in 59 cities across the country, and it's working in places like Memphis and every other city we have it.
Are you aware of the fact that Homeland Security investigation is a major directorate within Immigration and Customs Enforcement?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And are you aware that Senate Democrats have uniformly voted not to fund the Department of Homeland Security, including Homeland Security investigations, TSA, FEMA, and other functions of the Department of Homeland Security?
Senator, I'm aware that employees of DHS are 1 month without pay.
They're not being paid, right?
Yes, sir.
And we were all seeing what's happening at airports, where people are having to wait hours at a time because of the fact that these TSA agents are overburdened. But what I wanted to focus on with you is the refusal to fund the functions of the Department of Homeland Security, including Homeland Security investigations, making Americans less safe?
Absolutely.
So give us an example of some of the cooperation that you all have engaged in with, the FBI has engaged in with the Homeland Security investigations. I'm looking at an article here that talks about the 190,000 Afghan nationals that were admitted to the United States, literally unvetted, and there are examples of individuals within that 190,000 who have committed terrorist attacks against the United States and against American citizens. Is that the sort of thing that you are investigating with HSI?
Senator, that's one of the many things we're investigating with HSI, DHS, CBP, ICE.
Give me some other examples of the collaboration on what other topics, including in addition to terrorism attacks.
What we're allowed to do with our DHS partners, Senator, is enable their massive workforce to supplement ours. And what they're allowed to do is share intelligence on things that you just talked about the 100,000+ illegals that came in from Afghanistan during the Afghanistan withdrawal. Unfortunately, they weren't vetted thoroughly. So what we're doing is going back with our DHS partners and vetting absolutely every single one of them to the best that we can. But unfortunately, we're not able to go out into the country country and find every single one of these individuals. But we need more than 12,000 FBI agents to do that job, which is why we are utilizing the 100,000 or so 1811s at the Department of Homeland Security to give us the information they have from their immigration records, from their travel records, from their travel logs overseas and within the country. And what we're able to do is remove these individuals off the streets in every single state across the country, to include violent gang members, to include Trende Aragua, to include ISIS-affiliated individuals, to include Al-Qaeda-related affiliated individuals. And hopefully we do it before and not after, like the tragedy that we witnessed in Washington, D.C., where an individual from Afghanistan was allowed to enter into our country and shot multiple members of our uniformed military service.
Thank you.
Senator King. Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Gabbard, last year your agencies testified, and I quote, "Iran's large conventional forces are capable of inflicting substantial damage to an attacker, executing regional strikes, and disrupting shipping, particularly energy supplies, through the Strait of Hormuz." In other words, every problem we're seeing now was not only foreseeable, but was actually predicted by the intelligence agencies. So, Director, in the lead up to the start of this war 3 weeks ago, did the intelligence agencies stick to their assessment that in response to an attack, the Iranians had the capability to shut down the Strait of Hormuz?
Thank you, Senator Wyden. The intelligence community has continued to provide the president and his team with the intelligence related to this operation in Iran before and on an ongoing basis.
So right now, we're in a global energy crisis. We're paying more for gas. The economy is in danger. And it seems to me, and I heard you discuss this with Senator Warner too, that there's a lot of hedging going on with respect to entirely foreseen consequences of the war. And that strikes me, Madam Director, as what amounts to a historic mistake. Now, my second question is, did the intelligence agencies assess that the Iranians could respond to a regime change attack from us by attacking U.S. forces and other Americans in the region?
The IC assessment has always taken very seriously the threat of the Iranian regime's missile capabilities and how our American troops within the region may be put at risk.
Again, you know, it seems to me with Americans dying in the war, it's hard to see how you can sit here and say that the intelligence agencies couldn't provide a clear warning that if attacked, the Iranians would respond by attacking our people. Now, on Monday, Madam Director, Donald Trump was asked about Iranian strikes on the Gulf states. He said, and I quote, no, the greatest experts, nobody thought they were going to hit the Gulf states. You all are supposed to be the greatest experts. That's what we have you there for. Director Gabbard, did the intelligence agencies assess that Iran could conduct strikes on our own partners in the region if it was attacked?
The intelligence community has continued to assess the potential threats to the region, the existing threats to the region, and providing those assessments to the policymakers and decision makers.
Let me move on to several others of you with respect to 702 of FISA, and I'm just going to start with you, General Hartman. When Congress last reauthorized Section 702 of FISA, it included a provision that expanded the type of companies and individuals who could be forced to assist the government in its spying. Has this expansion resulted in any intelligence, General Hartman?
Senator, thanks for the question. Just to be clear, this provision provided us an ability to collect foreign intelligence on personnel outside of the United States.
This is the major 702 issue in terms of expansion. What was the effect of what was done?
Senator, I would prefer to talk to you about exact specifics in the closed session.
I'm happy to do that. Let's understand, though, this is a dangerously broad provision that could be used to rope in anybody with access to a cable box, a Wi-Fi router, or a server. It was jammed into the 2024 reauthorization bill at the last minute. Senators were told they had no choice but to support it. And now, 2 years later, we've just had testimony from a very respected individual who's saying so far it has had no value. So, colleagues, we are getting ready to have another discussion on this, and this ought to be a warning to every senator that not every new spying power that is sold as urgent and critical actually is.
Senator, could I please respond to that?
Of course.
So, Senator, I just want to be clear. It provided us no additional authority that doesn't involve collecting intelligence on foreigners that are outside of the United States of America.
Fine. Director Patel, a question for you. In 2023, your predecessor testified that, and I quote, "To my knowledge, we do not currently purchase commercial database information that includes location data derived from internet advertising." Is that the case still? And if so, can you commit this morning to not buying Americans' location data?
Thank you. The FBI uses all tools, Senator, thank you for the question, to do our mission. We do purchase commercially available information that's consistent with the Constitution and the laws under the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, and it has led to some valuable intelligence for us to be utilized with our private and partner sectors.
So you're saying that the agency will buy Americans' location data. I believe that that's what you've said in kind of intelligence lingo, and I just want to say, as we start this debate, doing that without a warrant is an outrageous end run around the Fourth Amendment. It's particularly dangerous given the use of artificial intelligence to comb through massive amounts of private information. This is Exhibit A for why Congress needs to pass our bipartisan, bicameral bill, the Government Surveillance Reform Act. I have time, I believe, for one more question. Director Patel, you 3 weeks ago indicated you were dissatisfied about having your phone records subpoenaed. Do you think the government ought to get a court order to collect phone records?
Senator, in my experience, the government does get court orders to obtain phone records.
One last question. General Adams, for you, in 2021, your agency confirmed that it had purchased and searched domestic location data. It is still your agency's position that you can buy Americans' location data without a warrant? And if so, are you still doing it?
Senator, thanks for the question. With regards to commercially available information and publicly available information, the purchases that my agency makes is in alignment with the Constitution and protects U.S. persons' information.
But you're buying location data, correct? I mean, we've now had that referred to twice, and I don't think there's any question that you're doing it.
All of the purchasing of commercially available information by the agency is passed through legal channels and is in complete compliance with laws.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
General Hartman, I want to give you a chance to answer more specifically what Senator Wyden said. You did answer it indirectly. Does anything in Section 702 give the government the authority to target any American with a cable box or a Wi-Fi router?
Chairman, nothing in 702 gives us the authority to target an American with a cable router or Wi-Fi device.
Thank you. And I would observe about commercially available data that the keywords are commercially available. If any other person can buy it and the FBI can buy it and it helps them locate a depraved child molester or savage cartel leader, I would certainly hope the FBI is doing anything they can to keep Americans safe. It's not much different from longstanding Supreme Court precedent that, for instance, says law enforcement can go through trash that you put on the side of the curb because you no longer have a privacy interest in it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do need to point out in response to some of the previous comments, twice in the last 2 weeks, as recently as last Thursday, Senator Patty Murray, the Appropriations Committee, put a bill on the floor that would have fully funded TSA, FEMA, CISA, and the Coast Guard for the rest of the year, leaving the focus on the dispute that we have with the conduct of ICE as separately. So inexplicably to me, that bill was blocked by my Republican colleagues. It would have, as I say, fully funded TSA, FEMA, CISA, Coast Guard, and then focused the attention on the situation with ICE. So I just want to be clear on who's blocking funding for those 4 agencies. I'd like to ask Ms. Gabbard and Director Ratcliffe, Director, both of you, were either of you in the room or your designees when the President was making the final decision about taking this action against Iran on February 27th, 28th? Was there an intelligence committee, community present in those deliberations? Mr. Ratcliffe, your response?
Senator King, probably in dozens and dozens of briefings with the President. I don't know if there was a single meeting where there was a single time where a decision was made.
Were those dozens of meetings right during the lead up to this war? I know you've met many times, but I'm talking about it in the 2 weeks or so before the decision to go into Iran was made.
Again, countless meetings with the President.
During that period?
During that period.
Director Gabbard, were you present in those discussions?
Likewise, yes.
The reason I'm asking the question is there seems to be a discrepancy between what the Intelligence Committee community has reported over the years and what the President has said in terms of of this action. For example, Senator Wyden read the report from a year ago that strikes against neighboring states and action to close the Strait of Hormuz was predicted by the intelligence community. And yet the President says nobody knew. And my question is, did you tell him? Anybody want to answer that question?
Senator, I'll answer the question. So with regard to briefings, the President gets briefings constantly about intelligence. Now, the comments that you talked about, I had not heard, but what I can tell you is that Iran had specific plans to hit U.S. interests in energy sites across the region, and that's why the Department of War and the Department of State took measures for force protection and personnel protection in advance of Operation Epic Fury. I think that's what's most important.
Any predictions to the President about the Strait of Hormuz? All you got to do is look at a map, and you'll see that the vulnerability of the Strait of Hormuz. Was that part of the briefing, Director Gabbard?
I think the Director Ratcliffe made the point here is that this has long been an assessment of the IC, that Iran would likely hold the Strait of Hormuz as leverage.
And my question is, was that communicated to the President in the lead up to this action?
And it's because of that long-standing assessment that the IC has continued to report that the Department of War took the preemptive planning measures that it did.
Well, they've stated that they did not plan for the Strait of Hormuz. The President said, who knew that was going to happen? Anyway, let's move on. Does the President take a daily brief from the intelligence community? This is a yes or no question, I think.
Yeah, the President, I would say, Senator, in my estimation, on average, I briefed the President of the United States on intelligence probably on average 10 to 15 times a week, where I have conversations with him about specific, discrete issues. Sometimes there are dedicated sessions that last hours in length. Sometimes I'm briefing him on specific issues, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day. But I would say on average, my interactions where I'm briefing the President on important national security matters happens probably on average 10 to 15 times per week.
Thank you. Could you update us on the intelligence on Russian intelligence sharing with Iran in the current conflict? What do we know?
Senator, if there is that sharing going on, that would be an answer that would be appropriate for a closed session.
Well, it's been in the public press. This is open source that it's occurring. Is it occurring?
Again, if it is occurring, that would be an answer appropriate for a closed session. What I can tell you is that according to the Department of War, any support that Iran may be receiving is not inhibiting their operational effects.
Okay, that's sort of the first cousin of a yes, I guess. According to intelligence analysis, can regime change or the elimination of the estimated 1,000 pounds of highly enriched uranium be accomplished without boots on the ground?
Senator, the discussion about the Iranian nuclear capability, we intend in the closed session to talk about that in great deal. With regards to revealing any information about the ability to do that, I would have to defer that to closed session.
Okay, I'll see you in an hour. Finally, there was very little, if anything, in the report, in the assessment about climate change, and that's been in past reports. There is a lot of discussion about migration. The estimates are that climate migrants, because of the changes in the climate and the atmosphere, and particularly in the center equatorial area of the Earth, will range from 200 million to 1 billion people by 2050. Do you believe that is a national security threat that should be addressed? The Syrian refugees were about 6 million, and they upset the politics of Europe for several years. We're talking about 200 million to 1 billion people on the move. I believe that's something we should be discussing and that the intelligence community should be assessing. Director Gabbard?
Yes, Senator, there are a number of drivers of things like migration. It would be an extensive and voluminous annual threat assessment if we included every single one. This annual threat assessment is focused, again, on the priorities laid out by the President's national security strategy and on the effects that we can take action, operational action, to protect U.S. interests.
Well, I would suggest combating climate change is something we can take action on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today to all of our witnesses. So for more than a decade, the United States has tried to make a pivot to Asia in its national defense strategy in order to confront significant threats from China. For years, administrations of both parties have identified China as a top threat facing our country and worked to build relationships across Asia and deter Chinese aggression. At the same time, we have bolstered our European allies and asked them to contribute more to their defense to deter Russia. Directors Gabbard and Ratcliffe, would you agree that China and Russia are our primary geopolitical rivals? Director Gabbard.
Yes, they are our primary strategic competitors.
Thank you. Director Ratcliffe?
I would agree with that, although I don't think they're equal in terms of the threats that they pose.
Thank you. So that brings us to the war with Iran. So this has created one of the largest ever supply shocks to the global oil supply, which has sent gas prices skyrocketing for Americans. But not everybody is losing. Directors Gabbard and Ratcliffe, is it accurate that Russia has gained billions of dollars in additional oil revenue due to price spikes as a result of the war and loosened sanctions? Director Gabbard.
That is what has been reported. I'd defer to the Director of Secretary of Treasury and Energy on that front for details.
Director Ratcliffe.
Yeah, I'm not an economist, not going to try and do those calculations. But as I talked about earlier, sometimes there are decisions made that will benefit adversaries. At the same time, policymakers think that it will benefit the American people.
It's clear, I think we'd all agree that sanctions were loosened, and that means more money into the coffers of Vladimir Putin. Would you agree that if he has more funding, he is likely to put that to his war effort against Ukraine? Director Gabbard.
I would defer to an actual intelligence assessment on what they would believe his intentions are.
Director Ratcliffe?
Yeah, I wouldn't speculate on that.
Wouldn't speculate? Okay. Okay. And is it accurate that China is continuing to receive preferential oil flows from Iran despite the conflict, as Iran allows its own tankers to transit the strait? Director Gabbard? I'm going to go back and forth between the two of you.
There has been some reporting of China, India, and other countries being able to move their tankers through the strait. However, it is unclear the volume or the measure of that.
Okay, so it sounds like it's accurate. Thank you. I'm going to move on. Director Gabbard, you tweeted yesterday that President Trump concluded there was an imminent threat and made a decision to attack Iran after carefully reviewing all of the information before him. I think the country deserves to know what the information was. I'm going to ask a series of questions and just want a yes or no. We don't need any explanation, just yes or no, starting with, were you asked, I'm not asking if you did brief this, were you asked to brief on whether Iran would close the Strait of Hormuz?
I'm not going to comment on what the president did or didn't ask me on any topic.
I'm not asking if you briefed it. I'm just asking if there was a request
I understand
by the White House. Director Ratcliffe, were you asked to brief on whether Iran would close the Strait of Hormuz?
The briefings to the president of the White House typically don't come at the request of the White House. So typically when we get intelligence that we want the president to be aware of, the intelligence community brings that to the president.
Did you produce the analysis for the Straits of Hormuz?
There has been and continues to be analysis with respect to that.
Were you asked to brief on how our adversaries and allies would respond to the war in Iran? I imagine I'll get the same answer. So it's just to point out here, it's challenging to forget about actually what was in the brief for a second. We're having a hard time finding out not only if you briefed the president on something, but even if the White House asked if they could be briefed on something or if analysis was produced. So I just want to point out here, this is about 6 days.
Can I comment on
Yes.
that?
Yes.
I go back to the point. It's the same approach that we took to the prior operations, which, to your credit, Senator, you have praised the intelligence and military communities in Operation Midnight Hammer and Operation Absolute Resolve. It's the same approach and the same professionals in terms of how they approached this particular operation.
We're trying to figure out if the president knew what the downside was of the Strait of Hormuz being closed. And I'm having a hard time finding out whether the White House asked or whether there was a brief, whether the president knew. Did he know this was going to happen, or did he just disregard it? And I just want to point out something that was released about 6 days ago. This is a fundraising email from the president of the United States. And in this email here, where there's multiple links to donate money, it says, as a national security briefing member, you'll receive my private national security briefings. Director Gabbard or Director Ratcliffe, do you think the public should be able to, supporters of the president should be able to pay and receive his private national security briefings? I assume these are briefings, Director Ratcliffe, that you provide to the president that is now going to be provided to somebody who makes a
regardless
donation.
of what that I don't know what that document is, but regardless of what it says, it didn't happen.
Oh, no, this is new.
But what I'm telling you is that the Hatch Act would prevent me from an apolitical role from engaging in that. I'm not aware that anything like that happened.
Yeah, this says unfiltered updates. So, Director Gabbard, do you have any comment on whether unfiltered updates of private national security briefings should be made to individuals that donate to the president?
I'm not familiar with that document, and
It's been made very public 6 days ago. We'll get you a copy here because I agree with you, Director Ratcliffe, that the Hatch Act should prohibit this type of conduct. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Mr. Director Ratcliffe, you just described the specific campaign that the president is engaged in, the country's engaged in, with respect to Iran. I think the campaign has been one, in my view, without a specific rationale for the American people. 19 days into President Trump's unauthorized war with Iran, and by which I mean there has been no congressional approval, at least 13 American service members are dead and many others are injured. that President Trump has offered no credible justification for an imminent threat, no clear goals, no strategy or timeline. His message keeps changing, I think, in really damaging ways. President Trump said Iran's nuclear facilities had been, quote, totally obliterated in June 2025. But when he launched this latest war, he said we need to eliminate the imminent nuclear threat of those totally obliterated nuclear facilities. President Trump has threatened to seize Iranian oil and demanded our allies reopen the Strait of Hormuz. He said that I'm demanding that these countries come in and protect their own territory because it's their territory. It's the place from which they get their energy. By the way, he wasn't just asking for our allies to protect or to bail them out in the Straits of Hormuz. He was asking China to bail them out in the Straits of Hormuz. And then he said, maybe we shouldn't even be here at all because we don't need it. We have a lot of oil. And he said, we do not need the help of anyone. President Trump has declared we've won the war. We won it in the first hour. But then he said, we're not leaving until the job is finished. He said that there is practically nothing left to bomb, but then threatened to bomb Iran again, quote, just for fun. I think words that probably have never come out of a military leader in the history of the United States of America. It shouldn't come out of the mouth of a civilian leader. President Trump said he will end the war when I feel it in my bones. And any time I want to end it, it will end. But, Director, the war is not ending. It is escalating with thousands of U.S. Marines reportedly sailing toward Iran on an unclear mission, a mission that's become less clear over days, not more clear. Our airstrikes wiped out Iran's missiles and supreme leader. Nobody here, and certainly me, is shedding a tear for him. But the Iranian people now live under martial law. And by the way, no surprise to our intelligence agencies that that's the case. And the first of a puppet leader who's chosen by the IRGC. No surprise that to anybody on the Intelligence Committee. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz and is holding the global economy hostage. No surprise to anybody who knows anything about U.S. intelligence, launching drones at our embassies and military bases. No surprise. The president is surprised. Nobody who has looked at our intelligence is surprised. Iran's nuclear program is damaged, to be sure, but it still has a uranium stockpile. We heard today from the DNI at the very beginning of this conversation that the regime is in place and they are going to rebuild their military capabilities, the ones that we are destroying right now. The question I think is raised, Director, about your specific engagement is whether it will become a perpetual war because what Iran will do is exactly what they have always done, and which the DNI is saying they will do again. In its briefings to the committee, the Intelligence Committee has been clear-eyed about what would happen in the Straits of Hormuz, has been clear-eyed about whether or not our military bases, our embassies, and our personnel in the region would be placed at risk and in harm's way, even though the administration did very little to protect them. I know, Director Ratcliffe, that you warned President Trump that if Israel assassinated the supreme leader, the IRGC would replace him with potentially a harder line puppet. In fact, I think what was clear is that the likelihood was that it would be a hard line puppet. Do you disagree with that characterization of the intelligence?
To that specific question, what we knew was, first of all, I guess I have to address up front, so much of what you related in there, the difference between political rhetoric versus...
Not political rhetoric. I'm quoting the President of the United States.
Political rhetoric versus military...
Director, I'll ask
the difference
you
between that and military and intelligence execution. But here's the most important thing. You mischaracterize this as saying there aren't clearly defined goals. The defined goals are very clear. Degrade and destroy the missile inventory and drone inventory, delay and degrade the military industrial base and factories that produce that, degrade and destroy the IRGC Navy that could control the Strait. These are all defined goals that were set out specifically. The premise of the question is that...
time back, Mr. Chairman. I can't get a word in edgewise. He won't answer the question, and then he's taken a minute of my time.
You're both big boys. You can handle it yourself.
Okay, well, Director, I agree that you are, and I appreciate what you're saying. My point is not what your characterization of the war is. My point is what the characterization, the commander-in-chief. I'm not asking you anymore, Mr. Director. I'm sorry because I'm out of time because of how you use the time. The complete lack of clarity should matter to everybody. President Trump, most of all, he is the person that got elected on the criticism that we had fought 2 wars in the Middle East that had lasted for 20 years. And now we're hearing the testimony is to get their ballistic missiles, to not even get to the nuclear stuff, we're going to have to be in a perpetual war with Iran. And I don't think that's where the American people are on this. This is a serious threat. This is a serious threat to us and to Israel. The question is how to handle it. And President Trump said, we are not the policemen of the world. He ran on that. And now he's turned us into the world's policeman, into its jury, into its judge, into its executioner. And just because we have the most advanced military in the world, it doesn't mean that we should be in a perpetual war all around the world. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. Before I ask you a few questions, I want to call everyone's attention again to this fundraising email signed by the President that Senator Kelly mentioned earlier, in which the President of the United States invites his campaign donors to, quote, claim your spot, join now to receive private national security briefings to his political donors, featuring a photo of the President at a dignified transfer ceremony with a flag-draped coffin of an American service member killed in action returning to their family. And the American people need to know that the President of the United States is fundraising for his political campaign and his PAC using images of American service members killed in action, and it's a disgrace. Now, Director Gabbard, I'd like to reground this in your core responsibilities. Under the law, you are responsible for providing national intelligence to the President, correct?
Yes.
And to the heads of executive branch departments and agencies, yes?
Yes.
And to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and senior military commanders?
Across the IC, yes.
And to the Senate and the House and relevant committees, correct?
Yes.
And the law states that the national intelligence you provide to Congress, quote, should be timely, objective, and independent of political considerations, correct?
Yes.
And you noted in your opening statement you're here fulfilling a statutory responsibility and that your testimony, quote, represents the IC's assessment of threats,
That's right.
Correct? That opening statement, as submitted to the committee in advance of this hearing, stated that as a result of last summer's airstrikes, quote, Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated, end quote, correct?
That's right.
And is that in fact the assessment of the intelligence community?
Yes.
So the assessment of the intelligence community is that Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated by last summer's airstrikes?
Yes.
And the opening statement you submitted to the committee last night also stated, quote, there has been no effort since then to try to rebuild their enrichment capability, end quote, correct?
That's right.
And that's the assessment of the intelligence community.
Yes.
The White House stated on March 1st of this year that this war was launched and was, quote, a military campaign to eliminate the imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime, end quote. That's a statement from the White House. Quote, the imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime. Was it the assessment of the intelligence community that there was an imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime?
The intelligence community assessed that Iran maintained the intention to rebuild and to continue to grow their nuclear enrichment capability.
Was it the assessment of the intelligence community that there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime, yes or no?
Senator, the only person who can determine what is and is not an imminent threat is the president.
False.
And
This
he
is the
made that
worldwide. This is the
determination.
worldwide threats hearing where you present to Congress national intelligence, timely, objective, and independent of political considerations. You've stated today that the intelligence community's assessment is that Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated and that, quote, there had been no efforts since then to try to rebuild their enrichment capability. Was it the intelligence community's assessment that nevertheless, despite this obliteration, there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime? Yes or no?
It is not the intelligence community's responsibility to determine what is and is not an imminent threat.
Okay.
That is up to the president based on a volume of information
precisely,
that he receives.
it is precisely your responsibility to determine what constitutes a threat to the United States. This is the worldwide threats hearing where, as you noted in your opening testimony, quote, you represent the IC's assessment of threats. You are here to represent the IC's assessment of threats. That's a quote from your own opening statement. And so my question is, as you're here to present the IC's assessment of threats, was it the assessment of the intelligence community that, as the White House claimed on March 1st, there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime? Yes or no?
Once again, Senator, the intelligence community has provided the inputs that make up this annual threat assessment.
You won't answer the question.
It is the nature of the imminent threat that the president has to make that determination based on a collection and volume
You're here
of
to be
information and
timely.
intelligence that he is provided with.
You're here to be timely, objective, and independent of political considerations.
Exactly what I'm doing.
No, you're evading a question because to provide a candid response to the committee would contradict a statement from the White House. Let me ask you about your presence in Fulton County on January 28th of this year. You were present at the FBI's raid on the Fulton County Elections Office on January 28th, correct?
I was present for part of the FBI exercising a warrant approved by a municipal judge.
Yes, and the FBI was there executing. The
investigation.
FBI was there executing that warrant to seize ballots and materials associated with the 2020 election, correct?
Yes.
And are you aware that members of this committee have already opened inquiries into your election-related activities?
Yes.
And are you aware that your general counsel and deputy general counsel have already provided testimony to this committee regarding those activities?
Yes.
On February 2nd, you sent a letter to Senator Warner regarding your presence at the raid. Was that letter accurate?
I don't recall the exact date, but if I sent a letter that had my signature, it was accurate.
You stated in the letter that your presence at the raid was, quote, requested by the president, correct?
Yes.
When did the president request your presence at the raid?
The day of the raid, the warrant execution commencing.
The day of the raid.
Yes.
He called you on the phone?
I'm not going to disclose how the message was delivered, but it was a request from the president and his administration to go and help oversee this warrant being executed along with the deputy director of the FBI.
Is it your role to
thank
oversee?
the FBI agents who were conducting
Is it
this
your
warrant.
role to oversee the execution of criminal warrants?
It is my role, based on statute that Congress has passed, to have oversight over election security, to include counterintelligence.
But you said you oversaw the raid, correct? You just testified you oversaw the raid?
Portions of it.
Okay. Did you handle any ballots or election-related materials?
No.
You were inside an FBI evidence truck, correct? You were photographed inside an FBI evidence truck.
It was an empty truck, yes.
The president stated, quote, you looked at votes that wanted to be checked out.
The
Is that
senator's
accurate?
time is expired.
Did you look at votes as the president
Senator
stated?
Ossoff, your time has expired.
You respond
can
for the
have
record?
her. No, she cannot respond
No,
because
for the record, will the director please respond for the record to that question is my
I'm happy to respond to questions for the record.
Thank you, Director Gabbard.
Thank you.
Chairman, thank you. I believe that it's in the U.S.'s national interest, our security interest, for Ukraine to be successful in defeating the Russian invasion. I'm concerned with the consequences of Operation Epic Fury on that ability of Ukraine to succeed in defending its borders. And General Adams, in broad terms, not necessarily, not classified terms, what are the consequences to the supply chain, to the capability of the United States to supply NATO allies and Ukraine as a result of Operation Epic Fury? My question is that usual problem of how do we do both? Are we doing both? Is U.S. support maintained or diminished for Ukraine as a result of Epic Fury?
Senator, thank you for that question, and we do continue to, beyond Epic Fury, observe what is happening across the world in crises like Russia and Ukraine. Unfortunately for the situation there now, just based on the force composition and the delta between the Russian forces and the Ukrainian forces, the advantage is to the Russians. As we get into the classified hearing, we can talk a little more specifically about the items with regards to supply chain and with regards to the information that the Defense Intelligence Agency collects. We look at the foreign threat and what their capabilities are from a multi-int perspective. We look a little bit less at friendly capabilities. Now I would defer questions with regards to U.S. supply chain limitations with regards to logistics and the effort that the Secretary of War is having with regards to trying to boost the U.S. Defense Industrial Base. I would defer those to the Department to discuss.
Well, General, please be prepared for the classified session for me to continue to pursue this. I mean, our supply chain issues are not classified in the sense that every hearing I'm in as a defense appropriator has officials from the Department of Defense testifying about the need for further assistance. And really, I'm asking for the facts of what has happened as a result of Operation Fury, Epic Fury, in the last few weeks in our supply to Ukraine and our NATO allies who are supplying Ukraine.
Yes, sir. The department is executing a comprehensive, in fact, the Sec War has gone around the nation to boost the defense industrial base. We know for a fact that we have to increase our defense industrial base capability. Its impact based on the munitions expended during Epic Fury will be an impact, but we need to boost it. The efforts are underway to boost it, and sir.
Well, I'm interested in helping accomplish that goal. Director Ratcliffe, perhaps along the same line, I assume let me first of all compliment you on your public service. I appreciate you. And that's not my usual town hall meeting when I get a compliment from somebody who then follows it with a but. I am interested in being of help, and in regard to your conversations in preparation for Epic Fury, I'd be interested in knowing if the consequences to our abilities to defend the United States against Russia or China or other adversaries was taken into account. How was that diminished or increased by Operation Epic Fury? And particularly in this instance about what it means, was the conversation had about what it means to our ability to help Ukraine defend itself? U.S. support for Ukraine includes military and other assistance, but also we've undertaken economic sanctions against Russia for their invasion of Ukraine. And Epic Fury has caused a significant increase in oil prices, and the administration has waived sanctions against Russian oil companies, which are reported to say that Russia is receiving $150 million per day additional as a result of the waiver. What can you tell me about our plans or your understanding of what's transpiring as a result of Operation Epic Fury in regard to those oil revenues that are now being generated in favor of Russia and the lifting of the sanctions, at least for a temporary period of time?
Senator, thanks for the compliment, I think. I'll start with a couple things. What I would tell you is the same military and intelligence professionals who delivered, not just for the administration, but for the American people, a flawless intelligence picture and flawless military operations in Operation Midnight Hammer and Operation Absolute Resolve are the same folks involved with Operation Epic Fury. And so I hope that provides you some measure of comfort with regard to how detailed, how thoughtful the approach was to the current operation. And that's why I think that to mischaracterize it as it is being done in the media is a disservice to the folks involved in what is a very specific campaign that is different than the two that I mentioned before. It's why the president came out and said, this isn't over in a matter of hours, this is a 4 to 6 week campaign, and that it would come at some cost, because the goal of the president and the administration is to address a 47-year problem, the most destabilizing force in the Middle East for the last 47 years, one that has frankly been watered, fed, and nurtured by policies of prior administrations that has allowed them to become the threat that they have. So I say all of that sort of in context to understanding that we have to address that, but at the same time, to your point on what's going on with regard to Russia and Ukraine, and you mentioned the oil issue. Sometimes policymakers have to take steps that, while they may benefit adversaries like Russia or China, do so because they also think it will benefit U.S. citizens, in this case with respect to keeping the economy on track and keeping oil prices low. So what I can tell you is the intelligence is thoughtfully considered, and I think that policymakers have taken that and I'm confident that we can walk and chew gum at the same time, pursue objectives in the Middle East, and provide support with regard to the conflict in Russia and the Russian aggression in Ukraine.